I'm 75 now, and I can't remember anybody except the Queen bee.
The room fell silent before Charles had even finished reading the first page. Across from him, Camilla sat rigid, waiting for the mercy she believed years of loyalty had earned. But the documents placed before the king carried Princess Anne's private seal, and their contents had transformed a family dispute into a threat against the crown. When Camilla finally made her desperate plea, Charles did not hesitate. He looked directly at her and said no. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Camilla did not move. She had entered the closed sitting room at Clarence's house, believing that one private conversation could still save everything, but Charles had already made his decision. The Queen Consort begged him to suppress the forbidden papers, protect her place beside him, and stop the formal palace investigation before it began. Forbidden internal documents were restricted royal records never meant for public access because they contained private instructions, financial approvals, and confidential household decisions. Yet Anne had placed them directly before her brother, leaving him no safe path back. Charles listened as his wife reminded him of the years she had endured beside him. She spoke of public anger, family rejection, and the long road that had finally carried her into the heart of the monarchy. Her voice shook when she warned that the files could destroy not only her reputation, but the life they had built together. The king remained silent. When she reached across the table for his hand, he slowly pulled it away. That single movement said more than any royal statement ever could. In that moment, he was no longer protecting a marriage. He was defending the crown. Anne had prepared for this refusal long before Camilla entered the room. The Princess Royal had preserved the correspondence after discovering that several original records were in danger of vanishing from the royal archive, the secure collection where the monarchy's official papers are stored. She had copied handwritten orders, financial authorizations, and private meeting notes connected to decisions made without full approval from Charles or other senior working royals. Her documented warning inside the final folder was brutally clear. If the monarch buried the evidence, copies would be placed before William and the senior household council, the group responsible for helping oversee major palace decisions. Camilla rose without another plea. As the door closed behind her, she saw Anne waiting at the far end of the corridor, perfectly still and fully aware of what had just happened. Neither woman spoke. They did not need to. Camilla understood that Charles's rejection had ended her final chance to control the documents, while Anne knew the battle had moved beyond secrecy. Charles had rejected the plea, but to understand why his answer shattered Camilla so completely, the private stakes facing each member of the family had to be exposed. This was never merely a struggle over paperwork. For Charles, the files threatened the fragile boundary between love and duty. For Camilla, they threatened the legitimacy she had spent decades trying to secure. And for Anne, they represented something even more personal, the belief that silence had protected the wrong people for too long. 3 lives had become trapped inside one decision, and whichever path the king chose, someone he loved would be wounded beyond repair. Camilla sat alone in her private dressing room after leaving Charles behind. She slowly removed the bracelet he had once given her, and placed it beside a framed photograph of them smiling during happier days. The Queen Consort stared at both objects as though they belonged to another woman, someone who had believed love would always protect her from the hardest consequences. Her place beside the monarch had taken decades to secure, and one set of forbidden papers now threatened to undo everything. She feared renewed public anger, but the deeper wound came from knowing that her husband had chosen duty over her plea. Charles remained at the table long after she had gone. The king had spent years trying to steady the monarchy while shielding his wife from fresh hostility, because another painful family scandal could weaken public trust at the worst possible moment. A courtier entered quietly, noticed his reddened eyes, and stopped near the doorway. The monarch did not look up. He only whispered that he needed another minute, and the aide withdrew without asking a question. The crown had survived through restraint, but that restraint now felt like a blade pressed against his own marriage. Anne carried a different burden. The Princess Royal believed service meant discipline, transparency, and sacrifice, even when the truth damaged those closest to the throne. Her anger had never been born from personal jealousy. One file suggested that her name had been used to justify a sensitive household decision she had never approved. A senior household decision was an internal palace choice, affecting royal duties, staff, money, or public responsibilities. For her, that false approval was not a minor mistake. It was a violation of trust. William already knew the documents existed, although he had not yet read them. Charles understood that once the future king saw the contents, quiet compromise would become almost impossible. His son would not view the papers only as a family dispute. He would see them as a warning about the institution he was expected to inherit. The rejection inside Clarence House was only the explosion. The fuse had been lit months earlier during one ceremony that changed Anne's suspicions into certainty. Months before Camilla's plea was rejected, a carefully managed royal ceremony appeared to unfold without incident. The smiles were controlled, the speeches polished, and the order of precedence seemed perfectly ordinary. Yet behind one locked door, Princess Anne discovered that her authority had been invoked to approve a decision she had never seen. That single moment changed everything. What began as irritation became suspicion, and suspicion soon became a private search for proof. Anne received the revised memorandum only minutes before entering the staterooms at St. James's Palace. The Princess Royal scanned the first page, then stopped when she saw her name attached to a decision she had never approved. A Commonwealth reception is a formal royal gathering involving representatives from nations linked through the Commonwealth, while a patronage memorandum is an internal paper recording which royal office controls or supports a public cause. The document claimed she had personally endorsed transferring oversight of a long-standing charitable initiative to an office connected with Camilla. She knew at once that the statement was false. Anne walked into a side room with the paper clenched tightly in her hand. A senior aide followed, already aware that something had gone wrong. She asked one direct question: who had written that she had agreed? The official hesitated before admitting that her approval had been understood rather than obtained. The Princess Royal set the memorandum on the table with deliberate care and demanded the original instruction. Her anger remained controlled, but the message was unmistakable. Someone had used her authority without permission. Charles faced her later that evening, exhausted and impatient. The king listened as his sister explained what had happened, but instead of ordering an immediate review, he asked her not to turn an administrative mistake into a family crisis. His dismissal cut deeper than the false authorization. Anne had expected resistance from palace staff. She had not expected her own brother to choose calm over truth. That moment pushed her into action. She began comparing archive copies with revised palace records and found dates that no longer matched, attachments that had disappeared, and several disputed choices presented as collective agreements. The Royal Archive was the protected record of official correspondence and decisions, making every missing page dangerous because it could change how authority had been used. Anne then recovered one note that changed suspicion into certainty. It described a private plan to expand Camilla's influence before William inherited greater operational control over the monarchy's daily work. The wording proved the pattern was deliberate. She sealed the evidence inside a restricted red case and waited for the moment Charles could no longer dismiss it. But Camilla discovered what had been preserved before that moment arrived. Once Camilla realized what Anne had preserved, there was no longer room for careful distance, and the two women were pulled toward a confrontation neither could soften. There were no aides in the room, no secretaries taking notes, and no courtiers available to soften a dangerous sentence. Camilla entered expecting negotiation. Anne remained standing, one hand resting beside the sealed case that had terrified the Queen for weeks. Their exchange began in measured voices, but decades of buried resentment soon rose between them. By the time a chair scraped sharply across the floor, both women understood that their relationship could never return to what it had been. Camilla had requested the meeting the moment she learned the files were about to reach Charles. The Queen Consort hoped she could persuade her sister-in-law to remove the most damaging pages before the king saw them. Anne agreed to meet inside a small Windsor sitting room, but she refused the request for a trusted advisor to attend. Windsor was one of the monarchy's main royal residences, and this private room offered no witnesses, no formal protection, and no easy escape from what had to be said. The Princess Royal wanted every word to belong only to them. Camilla spoke first. She accused Anne of waiting years for the chance to humiliate her, of hiding personal resentment behind duty, and of using the documents to reopen wounds the family had tried to close. Anne did not raise her voice. She answered that this was not about acceptance, marriage, or history. It was about authority being used under other people's names. She reminded the Queen that trust inside the monarchy depended on consent, because one false approval could make every future decision look dishonest. Camilla's control finally broke. She said she had spent her entire royal life being treated as temporary, tolerated when useful, and doubted whenever pressure returned. Her words carried years of frustration, but Anne did not soften. The Princess Royal replied that insecurity could explain fear, but it could never excuse bypassing consent or rewriting official records. Anne opened the sealed red case. A restricted red case was a secure container used to hold sensitive royal papers that required controlled access. She removed one handwritten instruction and placed it between them. The page carried corrections in her private secretary's ink, a mark Camilla recognized instantly. Her face changed, and she stopped speaking. The instruction revealed that a controversial transfer had been rushed because Charles was recovering from a demanding period and was considered unlikely to challenge the paperwork closely. That sentence destroyed any claim that the decision had been an innocent mistake. Camilla pushed her chair back. She warned that exposing the files would injure the king as deeply as it injured her, then left to make one final appeal directly to her husband. Camilla believed Charles still possessed the power to make the danger disappear, but the true balance of authority inside the monarchy had already begun to shift away from private protection. A monarch can command households, approve appointments, and close doors that ordinary people could never reach. Yet Charles discovered that the crown's power had limits, precisely when he most wanted to use it. Suppressing Anne's documents might have protected his wife for a moment, but it would have placed his own judgment under suspicion. Alone with the evidence, he faced the cruelest truth of kingship. Authority becomes meaningless when it is used only to defend the person closest to the throne. Charles remained alone in his study, with the most damaging memorandum open before him. The king read each line slowly, then removed his glasses and pressed his fingers against his eyes. Halfway through the page, he turned the document face down, as though another sentence might make the damage impossible to deny. An internal review was a private palace examination used to test whether official decisions had followed the correct rules. He had the formal power to control that process, but duplicate copies of the files already existed. Hiding them would not end the crisis. It would turn a household scandal into a threat to the monarchy's credibility. Anne's position made the danger even greater. The Princess Royal had spent decades building a reputation for discipline, directness, and duty, so her evidence could not be dismissed as gossip or personal revenge. William's role also changed everything. As the future king, he would one day inherit not only the crown, but every weakness left unresolved beneath it. Excluding him now could make Charles appear more concerned with protecting Camilla than protecting the institution his son would lead. The private secretary entered carefully and found the monarch staring at the covered page. He reminded Charles that loyalty to his wife and loyalty to the crown were no longer the same decision. The king reacted with sudden anger, demanding whether anyone understood what was being asked of him. Yet the official did not retreat. After a long silence, Charles lowered his voice and admitted that he already knew the answer. Legal advisors then presented the only path that avoided a public proceeding. Several disputed actions could be reversed quietly, but Camilla would have to surrender selected household privileges and accept written limits on her administrative influence. Those limits would prevent her office from approving sensitive transfers, altering records, or acting in the names of other royals without direct consent. William added one condition of his own through a documented private message to his father. He would support a private settlement only if the full archive was secured, and Anne's false endorsement was formally corrected. Charles accepted. The decision was made. He summoned Camilla again, not to reconsider her plea, but to explain what she would now lose. The king's refusal had begun as a single word, but in the next meeting that word would become a list of consequences Camilla could neither negotiate nor escape. The punishment did not arrive through a public proclamation or a dramatic removal of titles. It came through a sheet of paper placed carefully between husband and wife. Each line took something from Camilla: access, authority, influence, trust. She read the conditions once, then again more slowly, as though the words might change beneath her eyes. When Charles asked her to sign, she did not argue. Her silence revealed that she finally understood how far the ground had shifted. Camilla sat opposite Charles with the agreement resting between them. The queen consort held the pen, but did not lower it to the page. The document required her to surrender control over selected household appointments, charitable transfers, internal correspondence, and restricted archival requests. Those requests allowed senior royal offices to access protected historical records, making the loss especially painful because it removed her from decisions she had once helped shape. She finally looked at her husband and asked whether he still believed she had acted for the good of the monarchy. Charles did not answer quickly. The king told her that intentions could not erase methods, and good motives could not excuse decisions made without proper consent. His words were calm, but the distance between them had become impossible to ignore. Camilla lowered her eyes, signed the agreement, and watched her hand tremble as a drop of ink marked the corner of the page. She had kept her title, but the authority behind it had been reduced in one quiet stroke. The consequences moved quickly. A neutral review team was appointed to examine every decision named in Anne's files. This team was made up of officials with no direct loyalty to either household, giving the inquiry enough independence to appear credible inside the palace. The original documents were then secured in the royal archive under joint authorization from Charles and William, meaning neither side could alter or remove them alone. One of Camilla's closest aides was quietly removed from sensitive duties after giving a documented statement to the review team. The official admitted that several records had been revised to make disputed choices appear unanimous. That confession ended any remaining hope that the crisis could be explained as a simple clerical error. Anne received written confirmation that her name had been used without authorization. The Princess Royal read the letter once, folded it carefully, and placed it beside her. She did not celebrate. Her face carried only sadness, because being proven right had come at the cost of trust inside her own family. The settlement appeared complete, until Charles requested a private meeting with his sister, without advisors, papers, or anyone else to hide behind. The practical consequences had been imposed, but the emotional future of the family now depended on whether Charles and Anne could speak honestly after months of mistrust. When Charles entered the room, Anne did not rise, and he did not expect her to. There were no files between them now, no officials, and no language of procedure. They were simply a brother and sister carrying the damage of choices neither could undo. Charles had protected peace until peace became dishonesty. Anne had defended duty until duty wounded her family. In the silence before Anne spoke, both finally saw the price the other had paid. Charles had requested the meeting after Camilla signed the restrictions. The king wanted to know why his sister had gathered the evidence in secret, instead of trusting him from the beginning. Anne answered without anger. The Princess Royal reminded him that she had tried to warn him after the Commonwealth reception, the formal gathering where her name had first been attached to a decision she never approved. He had asked her to remain quiet, and that request convinced her that proof had to come before another conversation. Charles lowered his eyes. He apologized for treating her concern as a personal grievance and admitted that fear had controlled him. Another royal scandal could weaken public trust, damage Camilla again, and place fresh pressure on a monarchy already struggling to appear steady. Yet by protecting the appearance of peace, he had allowed wrongdoing inside his own household to remain unchallenged. Anne's expression softened when her brother spoke about his wife. The monarch confessed that rejecting Camilla's plea had been one of the most painful decisions of his reign. He had watched her understand, in a single moment, that love would not shield her from consequence. The Princess Royal listened, then told him that doing the right thing often felt nothing like victory. Sometimes duty left everyone standing, but no one untouched. Charles then revealed the final shape of the settlement. Camilla would remain beside him in public, but her role would become ceremonial. A ceremonial royal role meant attending events, supporting public causes, and representing the crown without holding independent control over sensitive palace decisions. She would keep her dignity, but not the authority that had created the crisis. Anne agreed to support that resolution, though she demanded one lasting safeguard. No royal name could ever again be used as proof of approval without written consent. The king gave his word. For the first time in months, the distance between them began to close. Their private reconciliation gave the palace a united position, but it came too late to preserve secrecy. News of the forbidden documents had already escaped beyond the royal walls. Charles and Anne had reached an understanding in private, but outside the palace gates, one image was about to turn a hidden family reckoning into a national event. By sunrise, the secret was no longer confined to royal corridors. Commuters stopped beside newspaper stands, broadcasters abandoned planned segments, and a crowd began forming outside Buckingham Palace. The story was no longer framed as a disagreement between two royal women. It had become a test of Charles himself. Had the king protected the crown, betrayed his wife, or acted only when silence became impossible? One front page captured the entire crisis in 4 brutal words. The king said no. Camilla watched the morning broadcast alone. The queen consort sat motionless as a presenter described the limits placed on her role and the quiet removal of authority from her household. An internal review was a private palace investigation used to examine whether official decisions had followed the proper rules. The palace confirmed that such a review had taken place, and that administrative duties had been revised, but it refused to release the restricted documents. That silence only fed the public hunger for answers. Camilla reached for the remote when an old photograph of her and Charles appeared beside the headline. She muted the television and stared at the screen without blinking. The image showed unity, but the words beneath it told a different story. Years of effort had brought her into the center of royal life, yet one refusal had exposed how fragile that position still was. Charles faced the same storm from another angle. The king was driven past Buckingham Palace and saw people pressing newspapers against the railings. Some praised his decision, others accused him of acting too late. He turned away from the window, knowing that a private exchange with his wife had become a public symbol of duty. Anne's name moved through every broadcast. The Princess Royal was praised for refusing to remain silent. But the coverage also raised a sharper question. How had disputed decisions escaped oversight for so long? A major broadcaster displayed a timeline beginning with the Commonwealth reception and showed how her name had been attached to an approval she never gave. The Commonwealth reception was a formal royal event involving representatives from nations linked through the crown, making the false endorsement even more serious. Then one moment captured the mood outside the palace. A woman placed a handwritten sign against the gates that read, "Duty means saying no." Phones rose around her as strangers photographed it, and within minutes, the words spread across every major platform. Public opinion had found its symbol. Yet headlines could not decide what the crisis truly meant. That verdict would belong to Charles, Camilla, and Anne after the noise faded. The crowds, headlines, and arguments would eventually disappear, leaving the 3 central figures to face the permanent emotional verdict created by one refusal. In the end, there was no triumphant winner standing above the wreckage. Anne had been proven right, but the truth had wounded her brother. Charles had defended the monarchy, but he had broken something intimate within his marriage. Camilla kept her title and public place, yet lost the private authority she had fought years to build. The crisis ended not with celebration, but with a painful understanding. The crown survived because each of them was forced to surrender something personal. Charles found Camilla standing beside the window at Clarence's house after the internal review had formally ended. The king told her that the disputed authorizations had been reversed, Anne's name had been cleared, and the original files had been secured. An internal review was a private investigation used by the royal household to examine whether official choices followed proper rules. Its final decision permanently restricted the queen consort's control over sensitive appointments, charitable transfers, financial approvals, and palace records. Camilla listened without turning toward him. She understood that he had not rejected her as his wife, but she also understood that he could not defend actions that had damaged trust in the crown. When the monarch tried to explain that distinction, she answered quietly that she accepted the decision even though she could not forgive how it felt. The queen then placed her signed copy of the agreement inside a drawer and closed it gently. That small act carried a final truth. The influence she once held would never return. Anne made her own choice once the corrections were complete. The Princess Royal decided not to release the forbidden documents publicly, confirming her decision through a written account delivered to Charles and William. Her goal had never been humiliation. She wanted accountability, clear limits, and proof that no royal name could be used again without direct written consent. Charles approved that safeguard immediately. From that moment forward, every household, patronage, financial, or ceremonial decision required clear authorization from the royal whose name appeared on it. A patronage is public support given by a royal to a charity or organization, and attaching a royal name gives that cause influence and credibility. That power could no longer be borrowed in silence. Camilla remained beside her husband in public, but her role became narrower and largely ceremonial. Anne returned to her duties with her integrity restored. Charles emerged wounded, yet stronger as king, because he had finally placed responsibility above private loyalty. And so the forbidden documents were locked away, the corrected record remained, and Charles's answer became final. Love could remain within the palace, but it would never again be allowed to stand above the crown. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.